We've been working on a mini sandbox RPG in Godot game engine. We are stuck in a generational spaceship, and it's been a hot minute since we started. The progress so far is bullshit. It's still just a test room with no playable demo to show for. I have a feeling a lot of you are in similar positions with projects of yours. You've been working hard, but somehow that doesn't translate into a product you can show people. I actually don't feel bad about the progress on our game. It's not like I've just been slacking off. I've actually been busy, like moving countries busy. And we have done a lot on core systems that will be essential to making this game top sliced bread. And they've taken a while because we've been making a point of doing things right the first time. We've also been using an unconventional development style where we don't prototype things, but rather slowly build up in horizontal slices. Now, I'm not saying this plan was bad, okay, this isn't anyone's fault, but I am saying we gotta move into a new stage of development where we think of things a little different. I intended to release a beta by the end of the year, but I just noticed the year is almost over or something. Optimistically, we're less than a quarter through total development, and it's been roughly 6 months, so that means this will be a minimum of a 2-year development. I don't know about you, but I don't still want to be working on this when Trump is back in office. I've got other plans. We need to focus on features that will make this a playable game and not just a project, and then we gotta start actually making content. Systems we've been missing right now that we need before we can continue are a save file system and some kind of character creation. The way I've done save files in the past was to manually read and write whatever info needed to be saved one by one from and to a custom file format. This is pretty intuitive, and it means the save files aren't any bigger than they need to be. The problem is that it's not enough to just save the player's position in a few global variables. It's not even enough to store all the player's stats. We gotta store all the NPC's states as well. And let's say the player moves an object across the map or opens a door. We don't know if that's part of some important plan of theirs, so we gotta save the position and state of all game objects in the entire map. And we don't know what features we might add later that will require something to be saved. This game is so complicated, the manual approach becomes a lot of error-prone work, and it's hard to maintain as the project grows. Wait a tick, we're using a game engine. It already has a system for saving all the information for an entire scene to the disk. It's what the editor does every time we make a level. We just need to access this system during runtime. Godot revolves around nodes and resources. Nodes are objects and have behavior. Resources are data packages for storing stuff. For example, this cube is a node, but its material is a resource, since the material is just data for the mesh to use. Except every node starts out as a resource before it is instanced. So somewhere there is a base resource for a rigid body class, and it gets referenced every time we create an instance of rigid body. The same thing happens whenever we save or load a scene. The in-engine node tree of a scene gets converted into a .tscn file, which is a resource, and then whenever we open up that scene again, the resource gets converted back into a node. Because this is how the engine operates, it already has a lot of useful functions for this process. To test this, we made a wrapper scene that can instance and save our test room as a child of itself. And then I hit save. Now if we look in the user directory, we have this map.tsc that was just created. And then run the game again. Load the save, and we've picked up where we left off. There seems to be some bugs though. The weapon disappeared and the actions aren't working. It seems that none of the script variables are being saved, which kind of defeats the purpose. But I looked it up and it seems we just have to put this export keyword on variables we want to be persistent. Tedious, but what the fuck. Okay, this doesn't let me export my custom class types. Can I export a reference variable? No, this is going to be a big problem. Sidestepping this issue was one thing, but as we tried to get this save system working, we just kept running into incompatibilities between the way we had made the game and this save file system. We were using references and non-node inheriting custom classes all over the place. For example, we have a status effects system where the status effects are instances of custom classes that were being stored outside of the characters that have them, and the characters just had references to those instances. What that meant was when the game was saved, even if we were able to save the references, the actual data they were pointing to wouldn't be saved. The resource system wasn't the silver bullet we had hoped. I guess in theory the scripts themselves could be saved as resources, and we could manually set object scripts to those rather than the base scripts they originally used. But even if that did work, it starts becoming ridiculous because we would basically be making a copy of the entire project for each save, and each save would consist of a bunch of separate files. I did a little bit of experimenting and decided to make each status effect a node with its own scene and script files. Then we can add a new instance as a child of any character we want to give it to. That way the status effects will be saved with everything else as a node. It's a subtle change, but we had already made a bunch of stuff assuming the old system, so it took a lot of tedious refactoring to switch. And getting everything to save and load properly meant several days of troubleshooting some really enigmatic bugs. It doesn't seem a lot of people have done done exactly what we're doing, or at least they haven't posted much about it online. So let's just merc this guy real quick and unlock this perk. Now if we look at the scene tree, the NPC has dead and prone status effects as child nodes, and the player has that perk as a child as well. Now let's save this, reload, and all the status effects are still here. Now it's important to understand that there are some real drawbacks to doing the status effects this way. Every node and every script has some additional metadata and processing overhead that really isn't necessary for those effects. Basically this means adding a lot of bloat to our project when this whole saving an entire scene as a resource thing already makes the save file sizes pretty big. So now to repeat this bloating process for a whole bunch of other things in our game. For those of you who kept up with this project, we're changing the action records and the NPC's ideals and behaviors to this new node-based system. Oh wow, that was quick. With the amount of tiny things we're having to refactor for this save system, we really should have just thought about this earlier. But at least we're thinking about it now. Think of all the other things we would have to refactor if we did it later. And I guess I wasn't sure what we really wanted from this save file system up until now. Like at some point I thought one playthrough of this game would be so short that we might not even need a save game. And then I came to my fucking senses. Although we started out with the idea that this game should have minimal scope, for a sandbox RPG even that is still pretty darn big, but it's doing the boring work like this that will get us to the finish line in the end, even though I couldn't say where the finish line is to be exact. The only time the player won't start a session by loading a save game is when beginning a new playthrough, which would go through character creation, which we needed to make anyways. So let's get started on the Oh my gosh, this is taking forever. Not like it's particularly hard. Menu creation is just so boring.
1 week later.
I've run out of momentum here. I'm having a mild crisis of whether this game is interesting or even worth making. I know at some point this project was exciting to me, but I've been working on it for so long that it's kind of old news to me. It doesn't really feel like we're making progress. When I take time off Spaceborne to come back with fresh eyes, it makes it worse because progress slows further, and it's hard to get my head back in the zone. But I guess the character creation is done now. We're converting the save loading scenes from earlier into a generic loading screen that we can switch to anytime we need to load a game. We've given it a variable for the path to the file to load, and if it isn't specified, the scene just loads the base map and uses these variables to set up the player. Then the character creation menu instances the loading screen and sets all those variables when you hit the done button. Here's the character creation in action. You can adjust the player's stats, abilities, and the color and scaling of the model. And then load up the game and all that shit's been applied. We then spent like a whole day fucking with the menu scaling settings to get it to work in different aspect ratios, where I promptly realized that every menu I made before that scaled nicely to different resolutions actually didn't scale nicely to different resolutions. Basically any UI node in Godot that contains text is fucked. None of the anchor settings will help you. Where are these save files going to be located? Because Godot isn't cool enough to have the resource files be exposed when you export your game, instead packaging them all into one file with some fancy formatting, it won't work to put the save files in the project folder because the internal file system changes at that point. So it's better to put the save files somewhere outside, in the computer's user directory by convention. We're just having the character creation menu make a folder there with the name of their character, and then each playthrough's saves will be put in their respective folders within the user directory. We're now going back to the loading screen and making it able to load existing saves when given a file path. And let's move the save functionality to a global script for general use. Tie all this together now. Here we made a little submenu for saving and loading. It's technically part of the pause menu, but we gave it its own script for tidiness sake. So we can make a character, then start the game. Got all the right stats. Now we set it to automatically make a save when you start a new game, but let's make another save. We should really make some kind of notification system so the player knows it worked. Then we can load a save. Oh. Color reset? Fixing the color not saving issue shouldn't be too hard. We can overwrite saves too. We load that save again and it's where we just were and not the original save. We've been kind of making this game in reverse order of how the player will see everything, starting with the gameplay, then doing the loading screen and character creation, and finally we're making the main menu, which is, where the player is going to start. We'll make some cool art to put it in later, but for now we just get into the functionality. We can see these save games from earlier, and we can go to the character creation, which you already saw. Let's go back and load one of those saves. And of course we can go back to the main menu. It's almost like this is all simple shit every game needs and we should have just done it earlier. I guess that's the essence of turning our little project into a game, isn't it though? Doing the little shit. But there's still the glaring fact that we need to actually make content for our game. We don't even have a map.